is time saving, but we also have another one that sometimes students feel comfortable being led by a teacher and they know where they are. And they
Yes, yes, I agree. Yes, that's okay. Has anybody got anything else for that box?
We have one more.
Yes.
That expected achievement is given to everyone equally, so everyone gets what needs to be learned. It's another idea if they will manage to receive it, but they get it.
Fine, thank you. Very helpful. Okay, shall we look at some of the disadvantages of telling? What would you say was unhelpful about a method that was based on telling students things?
No, there is one more advantage, if I can add.
Yes, yes.
It's the ability to clearly and unambiguously state certain principle or certain method of doing things.
That's helpful.
Is probably the most important advantage of telling things.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yavo, by the way.
Hi, Yavo.
Sorry to be late, but I'm very happy to be in this session. Hello.
No problem.
Good, thank you. Okay.
Are we moving on to...
Diana just also came, the director of the school.
Ah, hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for this session.
No problem. Are we moving on to disadvantages?
We
now?
are. We're looking at disadvantages of telling. So somebody tell us something for that box.
It's probably easier to forget what you've learned.
So for the students to forget, it's easier for them to, yes, that's a good point. Okay. Another one.
What we have put here is that most of the time with this way of teaching, students are passive most of the time. But they do one and the same thing. They're required to listen.
Okay. Yeah. Passive.
Pay attention, focus on something for maybe for a long time.
Mhm.
And so it's likely that they will lose interest.
Yeah. Fine.
The disadvantage we have put here.
Thank you. Anything else for the disadvantages? Have you got another one?
Some of the children might not understand what they've been told.
When we do this lesson, when we do this activity with teachers, Sarah and I often get a response where people say it's boring. And we always say, is it boring for the teacher or is it boring for the students? Or is it boring for both? Both. Okay, so let's be positive about a discovery method. What have you got that's an advantage about students discovering things, discovering ideas for themselves?
Well, we wrote that it's much more likely to grasp something and then remember it if you discover it by yourself. And maybe never forget it.
Okay, yeah.
On the other hand, that's a disadvantage. It is generally not possible to just discover complex principles.
Mhm.
Okay, so that goes in our disadvantage box. You've got that in there. Okay, all right. So we've got one in each. Have we got any more for a positive advantage for discovery?
Students are active. They own their learning.
Yes.
They follow their interests.
Mhm. Yeah. One more.
Interact.
They interact with others, with the environment, with the world.
Mhm.
So it's much more, yes, it's interactive and it covers a lot of other things. Okay, well, thank you. That's good. That is something you might want to go back to later on while in the training, because our approach with Let's Think, we hope, enables us to make the most of both ways of teaching. So both types, that we pick up the positives from both. And we're going to look at a few things later where we talk about it will be telling, and other times where it's going to be discovery, but the teacher is aiding that discovery. It's not just left open-ended completely. It's structured by the teacher. So thank you for that, all of you. Alex, next slide, please. When we think about what's happening in classrooms and what we focus on as teachers, one of the things that obviously is important is knowledge, knowing things, being able to remember things, practicing things, becoming skillful. And quite often, students will feel that these are all separate elements, that you might do something in maths, might do something in geometry, you might do something with numbers, and that they're all very separate ideas. And what's required is for them to know what those things are and to be able to work in the way that they've been told. Another level, Alice, can you just move the slide up a little, or is it just my screen?
It's just your screen, Linda.
Oh, right, okay, thank you. Another level, which goes alongside but underneath knowledge, is understanding. And I think we as all teachers know that we cannot rely on just focusing on knowledge, that students need to understand what they are doing. They need to be able to make some links between the bits of knowledge. There will be misconceptions, and the teacher's job there is to try and unpick the misunderstanding. And that is more demanding than just giving the knowledge, because you've got to be aware of what your students are doing in order to see where there are common misconceptions, for instance, and draw those out so that understanding underpins the knowledge. Next one, Alex. Now with Let's Think, obviously the other two approaches are important, but what we feel is that the dimension of reasoning is the most important. And so we help students build up ideas from a very low level. And we're going to see a lesson outline later on where we see how an idea that becomes quite formal and complex mathematically starts up very, very simply so that everybody can participate. We ground the work that the children do in these activities in their own experience. We get them to understand from their own experience what the lesson is going to be about. They investigate and discover, but it's within the context of a lesson that the teacher has prepared, and there is a certain flow of the lesson. And the teacher guides that investigation so that children's reasoning becomes the focus of the lesson. We're not talking about problem solving in a closed way like that, because what we want them to do is to be able to use their knowledge and become a move forward from something that's very simple, or it might be that they have an idea of a concept, but they don't really know where it's come from. So they have to work backwards so that they, in the end, they know exactly, they reconstruct really what their learning is. So when you're working with us on Let's Think, one of the main things we want you to think about is developing the students' reasoning, regardless of the topic, regardless of the subject that they are working on.
Alex, you're next.
Okay. So
That's what we want as well. That's why we're here, to learn how to do it.
okay, and so I'm not going to spend very long, but what's the effect of Let's Think is what people are going to ask. What's in it for us? And as Linda has said, the focus on reasoning and the highly structured nature of the lessons. We have anecdotal evidence that students improve the way they talk, the way they discuss, but we also have very, very hard evidence from exam results 3 years after the students have done 2 years of the original intervention was case, let's think in science. And this data shows a range of schools in England, and that's the x-axis, shows that they're schools from lower cognitive readiness schools to the mean for England, which is the 50, and a few schools that are more selective and have what you might call more advanced thinkers. And we had then, they were the control schools, the case schools, and the case schools actually took some time from their science curriculum for the case lessons. One lesson every fortnight was not delivering the normal science curriculum, but was this program in trying to improve reasoning. And our belief, and our evidence shows this to be true, is that this will have a long transfer, that students with better reasoning will perform better, their minds will be prepared for a greater depth of learning and understanding. And the vertical axis is in the United Kingdom, at grade 10, that's 16-year-olds, they take what's called the General Certificate in Secondary Education, GCSE. And the idea is to look at the gains of C grade, which is a kind of middle grade upwards. And you can see that the case schools, from schools that are not high performing to all those that are up to the mean of the country, have had a massive increase in their science achievement 3 years after. Also, this has been shown to transfer not just in time, but across subjects. And so these students didn't have Let's Think in English or Let's Think in mathematics, just Let's Think in science for 2 years. And they had a sustained improvement 3 years later across 3 main subjects of the curriculum. Now, the evidence for this has been replicated, and so we could spend another couple of hours for those of you that are interested in discussing this, but not for today. So we have really, really sound evidence of what we call long and far transfer because of better reasoning.
Before we start looking at a lesson, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the theory behind the lesson and what we ask teachers to think about when they're teaching Let's Think lessons. So Let's Think looks at developing 3 things in the classroom. It wants to develop your students to collaborate and to work independently. It wants to develop your curriculum by offering challenges that are just out of reach for the learners, so pushing their cognitive levels. And it wants to develop you as teachers to know how to mediate or organize or steer thinking in a classroom context. Next slide, please, Alex. And this is how these 3 areas interact together. Can you just load up all of the text and images, please, Alex? So in terms of learners, we are looking at whether students are emotionally engaged with the learning and whether they are cognitively engaged. Go back one, Alex. In terms of subject matter, we want to make sure the level of difficulty is absolutely right for the class and that the learning is also in a context which is interesting and accessible to them. And in terms of classroom interactions, we want to make sure they have the right resources and language to make sense of the lesson. And we want the teacher to group children appropriately and to mediate in children's discussions. Alex, can you put these ones up? to mediate in children's discussions so that the children learn from each other. If we look then at the overlap between those three, which is on the next slide, Alex. If we look at what's happening in engagement, we have students developing good attitudes and being motivated to solve the problem. In terms of subject matter, we have what's called social construction. So learners building up their own ideas, their own understanding of concepts in the curriculum. And in terms of the classroom interactions, the teacher helps to organize learners so that they are collectively engaged in the lesson. Next one, Alex. So if we have good construction and good engagement in a lesson, that means we have it at the very start of a lesson, a motivating hook. A hook is a story or a context for the learning, which immediately engages the students and makes them interested and want to solve the lesson. Because we know students are of all different achievement levels in the classroom, we also want a low floor to the lesson. That means that at the start of the lesson, even your lowest achievers can access the learning, but we want a high ceiling so that your highest achievers are pushed and challenged by the end of the lesson. If we look at the overlap between engagement and teacher mediation, what we then get is manageable mixed achievement grouping. So we always suggest you have your children in mixed achieving groups. The teacher is questioning in response to what children are saying and accepting all responses, not judging them, but deciding which are the interesting lines of student thinking to follow. And if we look at overlap between construction and mediation, we then have the teacher matching lessons to the cognitive levels of the different learners within the class. So what we might call a social zone of proximal development. And we will talk more about that particular bit a little bit later on. Alex.
Okay, we're moving towards a lesson that I will explain and also do with you. But just to get us advanced in our thinking, what you will see is parts of the lesson where we get all the learners to focus on the cognitive challenge. And then we will, once the students are involved in the task, we will extend their learning more by social construction in some groups, and we'll be doing that with you. And at various stages, some significant ideas will have come about, and we will have a look and think about our own thinking, our own learning. And this often then goes back to the next episode where the cognitive challenge will be raised slightly. And we go through this cycle quite freely at the different parts of a lesson. We will not get to see the whole lesson in this level of detail, but the first few episodes, you will experience this cycle, and it will be useful for us to discuss that.
Have we lost the teachers?
Looks like
I think we have. Yeah, Alex, while the teachers are coming back, Munda has loads of animations on his slide. Just load up the whole slide. I don't know why he does it.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, because it's not helpful.
I didn't look because
I never noticed, and then I start doing them and I realize he has loads of animations.
Let's take those out, shall we, after this session?
Yeah.
Let's take them out, because if we come back to this at any point,
it's very
we know we've
annoying.
done it.
Yeah. So hopefully they can come back.
I think it was Munda practicing with PowerPoint, actually. So
Yeah.
he got carried away.
Yeah.
He found a new skill.
Yeah. Hi, Mariana.
Mariana's here.
We've lost the teachers, so we're just waiting.
Sorry for this. It was just something with a problem with my settings, and I couldn't manage to turn it off, to turn my
No
camera.
problem.
And we've lost the others.
You
You are our only teacher now.
Okay, I'm ready to teach about Let's Think.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher of Bulgarian literature, and it is a bit challenge because because yes, we have a grammar, and I can't manage to make this grammar very exciting for children.
Yeah.
Did you see anything of the first bit we've just finished, or did you
I
not
see everything. Yes,
Oh,
yes,
you're
yes. I
good.
was listening
Good.
very carefully, and
Oh,
I was
good.
here. Mhm.
Okay. And Mariana, have you seen any Let's Think lessons before?
No, no.
Okay, that's good to know.
Only these materials that were shared from my school, but not. I didn't participate in any conferences, and yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So hopefully we'll get the teachers back. Should we email Yavor maybe? We should have a phone number for him really, shouldn't we?
Sarah, did Michael, has Michael worked in all the schools that are involved? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. I'm going to pause the recording for a moment.
Yeah.
Другото, аз сме обсъждали с теб тази структура на ПЖ за формалните знания би трябвало да означава, че е безсмислено да учим деца да вършат клас на формална граматика, преди че ние се опитваме да го правим. Това е един друг разговор.
Аз имам въпрос. Ако върнат на вас, да ми зададете. Имах, не разбрах. Can I ask for something? I need to take the 2 slides
Alex,
Two slides back.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I wonder what is handing context, handing relations, handing models.
Значи, това е целта на още се развее на три. Това е целта на първия епизод. За да може
Да създадеш контекст.
Да хендлинг контекст е да се справят с контекст.
Хендлинг, аз не го виждам.
Хендлинг.
Аз не виждам ното. Окей.
Тоест в прогреса на урока вие всъщност минавате през всичките фази от конкретна генерализация и формални операции. По този начин обемате всички деца, независимо от нивата. Цялата идея беше, това е точно същото, както въпросът на Джампан, точно същото се прави. Временно да могат да занимават всички деца. И чак тук някакви деца не могат да влязат. Но ти си ги ангажирал в тези класи. Ти си им помогнал да преминават нагоре. Това е идеята. Някакви въпроси към тях, които имаме.
Okay, we made it clear ourselves.
Thank you.
Други въпроси?
Не знам, много ми хареса.
Alex, can you go to the slide that we didn't see?
This one.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is it?
I'll tell you a bit about it. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about it. This is an example of one of the lessons which we will do with you later on. Every single lesson that is written is a set lesson that's been written and trialed many times. So when you get the lessons, you don't have to make up anything yourselves. The instructions are there. Tells you what you're going to do in the lesson. It gives you examples of the sorts of things that might turn up. But this is a picture of what Sarah was showing you. This is a lesson it's actually about the relationship in circles. So it starts at the bottom, a very, very simple level, where the children are finding out about comparing circles by using bits of string to find the circumference and the diameter. Very, very simple, and all the children can do it. Then we move up a level and we start looking at the relationship between those two things. Then we work a little bit more on refining it. So through the social construction, refine the children's ideas. So it goes from them being able to say something in all everyday language, like this is 3 and a bit, towards a real relationship between those things. Then they go into the next stage where the level of challenge is even higher, where they start looking at comparing circles and other shapes to the generalization that how you compare circles with polygons. So you're working from the bottom of the lesson up through, and it gives you examples of what they might say, but what you are aiming at each part of the lesson. So every lesson that we will send you, every lesson in our packs, the maths packs, has this sheet, which is really, we call it the thinking sheet. It shows you what level we are expecting at each stage of the lesson.
Yes, thank you.
That helped?
This is very useful.
Време на урока се вдига нивото към формална операция. И става все по-абстрактно. Това е точно също. Това е
And I should say that this sheet is very useful when you are working with children, because you can write their names next to the different stages, and that allows you to assess the cognitive level with which they access the lesson.
Can I just say, in this particular lesson, if you think of the top, if you think of the highest level, we're thinking about the notion of pi, the relationship in abstract terms. So you can see that the actual ceiling of the lesson is quite high, whereas you started with something very concrete, bits of string, measuring things out, descriptions, this is bigger than that, and so on. And through what Alex said, that things like, if I make the diameter bigger, the circumference will be bigger. So we're working on the same sorts of ideas in some of the mathematics as you will find in the science.
Evaluation.
One of the questions, how do we evaluate? How do we understand where each child is at the end or in the middle of the lesson?
Formative and summative assessment. How we can measure if we achieve our goal, objectives, our objectives.
And did you want to answer that, or Alex?
Well, I'll say something very, Alex, go.
Yeah, if for instance, I go back to this, the students have worked in social construction, and they have filled in on some of the note sheets what are the variables, values, and the relationship. And then the next stage is to organize these into the different classes of relationships. Now, some students will really, really struggle to do that on their own. And what I've done often is with some students is take them to one side when we're clearing up and say, can you, and I have on the board, no relationship box. If one thing goes up and the other, with a model of that as a graph, and said, can you just place these 5 in the correct places? Now, I've not done it as a formal test. I've done it with an informal discussion with students who I'm worried about that they are still struggling with just describing variables and values. Whereas others will have started generalizing, and I'll have heard what they said. Like, for instance, when we looked at the books together, it was reported things that were far beyond the obviously concrete ideas, like conditional ideas. If you'd read the book, or if there was a Spanish book, that would be a different value of the variable languages. And so those kind of record, as Sarah was saying, you might write down on your planning sheet, John said this here, which is a clear sign of them having met a kind of movement towards a more formal operational way of thinking.
So just to add here, this is not, let's think lessons are not opportunities to do summative assessment on children, but they are excellent opportunities to do formative assessment. So teachers in the UK will use them before they teach a unit of work so that they know what they will need to teach and to who, but they will also use them at the end of a unit of work to say, do the children actually understand and are they able to apply what I have taught them? But they are not opportunities for formal summative assessment of individual children's ability. And all of the assessment is done by listening to the children. Linda.
Some of the teachers we work with will make a collection of the children's work and copy it so that if you did a lesson like this, you may have examples of children working at the very earliest stages, demonstrate early thinking, and then examples of other children who are working at a much higher level. And for teachers, if your focus is on developing thinking, that's the sort of evidence you need to acquire over time, because you will see, hopefully, that as children progress through these lessons, they get used to the focus being on talking and teachers engaging with the children's thinking, that certain children, well, all children, we hope, will be moving on. So we don't have tests, we don't have marks. The teacher doesn't mark the work, but the teacher, it's interactive. The teacher interacts with the children to help them understand the children's thinking. And that really is, if you at the end of the lesson have learned something about a way certain children think about things, that is a great success.
И ако видиш, че на следващия урок то се справя с приборната база, so in a sense, what we're discussing here, and we'll translate it, is that in a sense, the teacher has a model in his or her head, maybe on paper, it doesn't matter. For each child, where they are on that scale of progression, of where they are, and observing the change, the dynamics of this gives you the progress chart, gives you what is happening. Right?
Yes.
And can I say, remember that we think the effect should be there 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or even more down the road. So we don't want to rush to early summative judgment.
Okay, yeah.
And can I also just say, I worked for years in the international baccalaureate curriculum, where we effectively, in the middle years program, had a lot of free choice about the content we were teaching in science. And I worked with our department to have a case lesson as the start of a unit that then really built upon the thinking schema of that case lesson. And we had assessments that were for the IB criteria, pre and post. And what we were looking for was evidence of increased ability to use models or to explain. And so case was almost like a skeleton of helping us know at each stage how ready students were. And it meant we could change our curriculum adaptively. We could increase the demand. And so we weren't using CASE as Sarah said, a summative assessment. We were using it to help form our ideas about how to organize our curriculum. And I think you're in a similar stage.
An MYP program here, so
Yeah.
very much in the same context.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's okay with you, I'm going to just move on to saying what we'd like you to do between this session and the next one. We are going to send you some videos with explanations of 3 lessons. The one you saw today, the follow-up lesson to that, which is variables 2, and an early algebra lesson from mathematics called Sports League. We recognize that not all of you would probably teach these lessons as it's not your subject specialism, but I don't know if Yavor can make it possible for the non-maths and science teachers to see the lessons being taught in other people's classrooms. If that's possible, Yavor, that would probably be helpful to people. Or if not, for those teachers that teach these lessons to be able to share the work and their observations of the lessons with their non-English and maths colleagues after they've taught them. Yeah, but do you think that would be possible?
Yes, indeed. Yes, we arrange that. We will also try to make recordings of this lesson, just the same as what we do in the English lessons with Michael, and they work very well for reflection and feedback and so on.
Well, we would be happy to listen to any recordings that you make before we meet you next time, which is on the 27th of May. We'd be really happy to listen to those so that we know how to shape the next session if you want them to send them to us.
Certainly, with some translation.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
And can I just say that during the technical problems, I lost some of the recording. So I'm going to have to put the parts together of today. But on the videos are also, they're lesson simulations that have pause moments in them where you can discuss what you've seen. And so they are actually like an online lesson that you can follow at your own pace. They'll be ready. Mine will be ready on Monday. And Sarah is sending you a link to all of the materials.
Okay.
All right. Please send us also the presentation itself.
We will.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've just put into the chat function, and I will email it to you, Yavor. We'd love it if everyone who came today would answer this very short form to tell us what you thought about today's session, what you enjoyed, and what you would like different or more of next time. So if every teacher who came today could just do that, it should take 5 minutes. That would be really helpful to us to know what you thought about today's session.
Yes, certainly. Just email that link to me, because this computer is the classroom. Just email the link.
I will email it to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
And we'll see you in a few
bye.
weeks.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, a bit. Let me just stop the recording.